Welcome. We welcome you to the Columbus Museum of Art this afternoon for a very special treat. Thank you all for braving the hot weather, for choosing to be here instead of the Rib Fest, because we love to see your faces. And most of all, we love to introduce you to new artists. We love to engage you in great conversations around art. So thank you so much for being here. My name is Deidre Hamlar, and I am the director of the Aminah Robinson Legacy Project. You may recognize I'm not Terrence Dean. He was not able to be here today, so I'm pinch hitting for him. And I thank you for allowing me to do so. I just want to tell you a bit, and I won't take too long, but we're here to celebrate the accomplishment of one of our inaugural writer in residence, Darlene R. Taylor, who is on the stage with us today. Not only has she become a warm and welcomed part of the museum family, I feel like we have become family as well. So I'm so happy to be able to have a conversation with her on stage today. Let me give you a little bit of an overview. The Aminah Robinson Fellowships and Residencies for African-American artists were launched in 2020 in partnership with the Greater Columbus Arts Council. Because Aminah Robinson was found to be such a prolific writer and researcher, the museum decided to launch its own writer in residency program in Aminah's name. And we decided to fund not only writers, but scholars and researchers, because Aminah did her work with a respect for research and scholarship. Our first inaugural writer in residence, Darlene Taylor, was selected by a very esteemed panel of jurors, poet, essayist, and MacArthur Fellow Hanif Abdurraqib, art historian and professor Lisa Collins, Columbus Museum of Art curator at large and Aminah aficionado, Carol Genshaft, journalist and WBNS Community Relations Director, Angela Pace, and poet, writer, and artist, Michael Rosen. So I thank them. If you're not in the audience, I thank them in absentia for doing a wonderful job of having Darlene be here today. So one time a year, we select a writer in residence, and she happens to be our first. Ms. Taylor comes to us from Washington, D.C., where she is a lecturer and PhD candidate in English at Howard University, my alma mater as well. She moved into Aminah's house on May 1st of 2022, and her 90-day residency runs through July 31st, just one more week from today. She has been so productive in unimaginable ways that you will hear about today. At this time, I am so proud to introduce you to Darlene R. Taylor.
So let me first thank Aminah Robinson for the teachings and the music that you heard as you sat and as you said hello to each other and settle into this place is inspired by her book, The Teachings, where she illustrated, where she wrote of African-American spirituals. So I wanted to connect with you all and bring a bit of Aminah Robinson's heart and spirit into the house with us. I also want to share with you all, just over here to the right, to my right, and to the front here, a family portrait. And within this portrait, within that music, within each of us sitting here together today. And for my family, our generations. Generations connected by stories, by love, by work. Long ago, I wanted to be a historian. Along the way, I found there were stories I could not know. I found landscapes full of histories, such as my family's home in Richmond, Virginia, and the DC my parents traveled to as part of what became known as the Great Migration. The work I am presenting and the museum has on exhibition comes from longings to find stories that help me better understand myself, my beginnings, and a more truthful history of my people. These three women present for me a starting point. What strikes me is their gaze, the deep penetrating look, the suggestion of stillness in a world of work. Questions about them, the women who might sit with them at the end of the day, the women who might sing with them, sew with them, the secret glances they share. I want to know. I want to know them, not for what they could have imagined for me or even about me, but what desires sat in their hearts, stirred their hearts, what they wanted for themselves, and what they thought of the world around them. What frightened them? How did they talk when they were sitting with friends? What they confessed? How did they talk to strangers? What did they conceal? What made them laugh? What was girlhood like? Womanhood? These questions for a writer lead to characterization. And this is how a fiction writer explores a character to make them round, full, real people that you can read about and connect with. This photograph was taken more than a century ago. And as I look at them, I think of the generations that hold us. Through them, I get something research alone cannot give me. I get memories. Memory, as Toni Morrison says, that deliberate act of remembering, a form of willed creation, to dwell on the way it appeared and why it appeared in a particular way. For me, it is to imagine what they have to say. During the residency, I sat with Morrison, with the work of Natasha Trethewey, Lucille Clifton, and Gail Jones, reading and thinking about gaps in history and how a writer writes through them. A line from Clifton's Generations tells me I'm on the right path. Clifton says, "Who remembers the names of slaves? Only the children of slaves." I can hear the three generations in this image saying, as Clifton writes in Generations, I could tell you about things we've been through, some awful ones, some wonderful, but I know that the things that make us more than that, our lives are more than the days in them. Our lives are our line, and we go on. I am part of that line. Their memories are mine. They come to me. My stories are no person's individual story. Instead, they're a collection of pathways and roads that express Black women's lives, their end of the week sweat talk, love talk, their recollections of yesterday. History is a muse that guides me to what I call porch talk storytellers. So I imagine these ladies sitting on the porch as they kind of appear to be doing a little bit and chatting. Porch talk storytellers, older women, cousins, women friends mulling over versions of the way things were. My childhood memories fill with the sounds of those porch talkers, their laughter, the cadence of their speech, their and humming. Today, the poetics of their woman-to-woman speech shapes my art. I am drawn to the faces, their stances, and expressions of people who have more to say than what's been said about them. While their life stories often fall into gaps as distortions caused by one-sided writings in public history, racism, slavery, Jim Crow, the presence contributions, and biographies of these people, I want to know. When I find a photograph or image as rich as this, I want to know the names and touch behind their eyes. I don't want them forgot. History's neglect of their stories extends to the characters in the published books of my childhood. The lack of characters who looked like me left me feeling that the experiences of Black women and Black girls did not matter. Their dreams did not matter. So, sadly, I thought my story didn't matter. But they let me know there are other stories to explore. They let me know the stories of their whispers, their witness, and their remembering. Fiction, and I'm growing to poetry. Allow me to find my way to stories born out of me. Those dark storyteller eyes meet me. Women, and you see them, their hair piled atop their heads in buns. Their stance stands in opposition to the neglect that we can see around them. Their heads are upright, their backs straight, their hands resting at their sides. They remember and they witness. During this residency, my fiction crossed creative boundaries and expanded through sewing, collaging, and silhouette. In the works I created, the assemblage of things echoes my thoughts on phrasing, centering, and as I said, characterization. The reflections in my Blood on a Blackberry frame my interest in digging around holes and finding material elements of our fragmented and unrecorded memory. Hand-cut shapes recall Black women's quilting traditions. Color and texture represent landscapes, plantation farms, childhood innocence, female vulnerability, and Black folks' resilience. The Blackberry is a metaphor of Black life as I construct stories that come to me in the poetry of my mother's speech, a Southern poetics as she remembers ingredients from a recipe, as she recalls her mother making buttermilk. I recall weekends gathering berries and patches along the country roads where my family roots began. The labor of children collecting berries and placing them in buckets. The walk along the roads, fearful of snakes, listening to what might be ahead, hidden in the bushes and bramble. Their memories suggest the handwork, craft work, and living history among fields, forests, and roads. So my narrative comes from stories women craft within domestic spaces, and the voices of grandmothers teaching how to survive struggle and also how to celebrate life. The Blackberry is that sweat work, life work, love work that is Black survival. It is the recipe that unravels the past so I can know the way Black people feed each other so generations survive. A rural Southern road is a beginning point that centers the speaker's recollections. Cuts from language, fabric, paper scraps reveal deep feelings that sit behind those looks. One generation shares with the next what they have witnessed and learned. But to get there, I begin with a question. How did she feel? She is always a Black woman's story, the missing voice that tells me the way things were. Aminah Robinson's house suggests attention to archive and preservation that interests me for how it stands in the context of Black art making and place marking. Robinson called her work the missing pages of American history. Thus, her journeys, that quilted mural mounted at the Underground Railroad Freedom Center in Cincinnati, and the text, and illustrations published in A Place Called Home, and the teachings talk back to the erasures of public history as she documents Black life and culture from her beloved roots in Columbus. That we can learn much about the connections between race and place in Black storytelling is evident in Robinson's art and the house at 791 Sunbury Road. Place matters in Robinson's storytelling. Therefore, the house, its contents, and her neighborhood biography provided meaning and a perch for me to create. As I expanded my ideas in Blood on a Blackberry, I felt kinship with Robinson's approach to telling the way things were. I am grateful to the Columbus Museum of Art, Nanette, for your leadership, Deidre, for your friendship, your leadership of this program, your caretaking of that house, the curatorial team, and I got to call out their names. They were just so wonderful to me. Tyler, Cameron, and Jacob, thank you for bringing today, for bringing it on. And the supporters and community of people who remember and preserve Aminah Robinson's legacy, and the home and Poindexter Village that meant so much to her. To the artists and friends who visited me in the studio, shared craft and stories of Columbus and their own Ohio histories, and helped me settle during this journey, thank you. To my family and friends who came and joined me from Washington, thank you. Special thanks to the photography of Steve Harris and the printing of Igloo Press. Thank you for the beauty that you have given me that makes today possible. Seeing these women, I realized my route map is incomplete, that my story begins in Virginia, I know, but beneath the waters, sands, farms, and buildings there, histories of ancestors wait to be claimed. Blood on a Blackberry moves through time and memory, the way memory is, in pieces, bits and pieces, and knowing that two people can share a lived experience and yet remember it differently. So here I'd like to share with you that title poem that inspires the work that you see in the gallery. The road bends in a place where a girl was snatched. No one knows her name. They talk about the bloody slip, not the lost girl. The blacktop road curves there and drops. Can't see what's ahead, so I listen. Insects scratch their legs and wind their wings above their backs. The road sounds safe. Every day I walk alone on the schoolhouse road, keeping my eyes on where I'm going, not where I've been. Bruises on my shoulder from carrying books, pebbles crunch, and engine grinds, brakes screech. I step into a cloud of pink dust and weeds. The sandy taste of road dust dries my tongue. Older boys, mean boys, cursing beer-drunk boys laugh and bluster. Rusty girl. They drive fast. Their laughs fade. Feathers of a bent bluebird impale the road. Sun beats the crushed bird. Cutting through the tall, tall grass, I pick up a stick to warn. Songs and sticks have power over snakes. Bramble snaps. Wild berries squish underneath my feet. The ripe scent makes my belly grumble. Brighter thorns prick my skin, making my fingertips bleed. Plucking handfuls, I eat. Blood on a blackberry ruins the taste. Books spill, backwards I fall, pages tear, lessons brown like sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, blackberry stain. Thistles and nettles grate my legs and thighs, coarse laughter not from inside me, a boy, a laughing boy, a mean boy. Berry black stains my dress. I run home. The sun burns through the kitchen windows, warming, baking. I roll my purple-tipped fingers into my palms. Sweet child, grandmother will say, smart girl, tomorrow on the schoolhouse road. The mulberry paper panels that you'll see in the exhibition are a multidisciplinary approach. Imagining this way, I feel I'm doing the work of these ancestor mothers that they call me to do. I'm using all I got. Language, color, form, texture, those everyday things from life that let you experience the stories that I'm collecting. As I think through how the story continues, I'm grateful for the sisterhood of a special person, Shauna Morgan, the encouragement of Molly Collins, as we discuss language, voice, motherness, Black womanness, and generations. And the talk of women as they wrestle through questions, vulnerabilities, trust, what we remember and what we want to forget. Leaning into each other and our craft. Textile artists like Elka Stevens and Marie Green, who I call Pumpkin, guided me through the stitch work as if we were creating our own mural of Black womanness. The piece that I created here that grew from that poem, Inside Me, is a poem that has that spirit. And I'm going to share that one with you now. Tasting the purple black spoon against the bowl mouth, oven heat sweating sweet nutmeg black. She halts her kitchen baking. Sit side me, she says. I want to sit in her lap, my chin on her shoulder, her warm, dark eyes cloud. She leans forward, close enough that I can follow her gaze. There's much to do, she says, placing paper and pencil on the table. Write this. Somewhere out the window, a bird whistles. She catches its voice and shapes the high and low in the words to explain the wrongness and lostness that took me from school. A girl was snatched. She remembered the ruined slip, torn book pages, and the flattened patch. The words, though, in my hands scratch. The paper is too short, I can't write. The thick bramble and thorns make my hands still. She takes the memory and it belonged to her. Her eyes, my eyes. Her skin, my skin. She know the ache as it passed from me to her. She know it like sin staining generations, repeating, remembering, repeating, remembering like she know what it feel like to be a girl. Her fingers slide across the vinyl table surface to the paper. Why stop writing? But I don't answer. And she don't make me. Instead, she leads me down her memory of being a girl. When she was a girl, there was no school, no books, no letter writing, just thick patches of green and dusty red clay road. We take to, excuse me, we take to the only road. She looks much taller with her hair braided against the sky. Take my hand, sweet child. Together, we make this walk, hold this old road. A milky sky flattens and eats steam. Clouds spittle and bend along that road. Sitting with these words, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. Sitting with these words, holding that road, I ache to know more of Fanny, a foremother, and other women like her. Fanny was born in 1840. She gave birth to a son around 1862. She was likely enslaved. She lived her years through the Civil War. She raised a son and generations. But what of her? And let me just share with you just a little bit of research, the time that I spent in Cincinnati and the kind folks at the Underground Railroad Freedom Center in the genealogy room who sat with me and we went through names and years and reports. And I just want to share a few snippets of Fanny, because when you see the work inside, you'll see these blank spaces. You'll see there's no text there because I don't know. I'm still working my way through it. So Fannie Lewis in the 1870 United States Federal Census. In 1870, she's 30 years old. Birth date, about 1840. Birthplace, Virginia. Dwelling number, 161. So as they march along the path collecting information, they note the house numbers. There's no real house number, but how many houses they've probably been to. Home in 1870, Northern District, Louisa, Virginia. Race, Black. Gender, female. Post office, Fredericks Hall. Occupation, keeping house. Cannot read, yes. Cannot write, yes. Inferred spouse, Anderson Lewis. Inferred children, Mary Lewis, Lucy Lewis, Thomas Lewis, John Lewis. So these were perhaps Anderson's children. Okay, in 1880, the census says, Fannie Lewis, age 40, birth date, about 1840, birthplace, Virginia, home in 1880, Reedy Church, Caroline County, Virginia, USA. Dwelling number, 228, race, mulatto, gender, female, Relation to head of house, self. Father's birthplace, Virginia. Mother's birthplace, Virginia. Occupation, cook. Cannot read, yes. Cannot write, yes. Neighbors, view others on the page. Okay. In 1900, there's another census report. Fannie Lewis, 58. Birth date, March 1842. Birthplace, Virginia. Home, Reedy Church, Caroline, Virginia. Sheet number, not sure what sheet number is, but number 14. Number of dwellings in order of visitation, 244. Family number, 250. Race, Black. Gender, female. Relation to head of house, servant. Marital status, widowed. Father's birthplace, Virginia, USA. Mother's birthplace, Virginia, USA. Mother. Number of living children, 2. Mother. How many children? 2. Occupation, cook. Months not employed, 0. Can read? No. Can write? No. Can speak English? Yes. And then there's a reference that I'll finally share that kind of connects Fannie's life for me, is Thomas Burris, 1880 census report. Name, Thomas Burris. Age, 18. Birth date, about 1862. Birthplace, Virginia. Home, Reedy Church, Caroline, Virginia. Dwelling number, 228. Mulatto. I'm sorry, race, mulatto. Gender, male. Relation to head of house, son. Father's birthplace, Virginia. Mother's name, Fannie Lewis. Mother's birthplace, Virginia. Occupation, works at sawmill. Cannot write, yes. And that's what I know of Fannie. But what I can see is, as the census workers went back and forth, we learned bits of her history. She's Black, she's mulatto. We learned that she does have a mother and father, they're in Virginia. We learned that she has a child, but we don't get fathers' names. That's an interesting detail for me. And as I search for Fannie, I want to know. As I think through how the story continues, I'm grateful for all of you and to the Columbus Museum of Art for bringing me here and allowing me this chance to sit beside you. Thank you.
Testing. I have so many questions, but I am going to leave space for the audience to ask a few.
Okay.
But just an observation. So I didn't know this talk, so I wrote questions, but you answered many of them, interestingly. But what I was really, I guess, the hairs stood up on my body when you read Sit Beside Me. I had read Blood on a Blackberry because it was part of your application, but I didn't know Sit Beside Me. So my first question is, was that written before you came? Or was it written, finished when you were here?
No, Sit Beside Me was part of the work that I did here. So I sat with Blood on a Blackberry and I started cutting in the studio. So one of the gifts of being here, and thank you, Aminah. Thank you, Deidre. Thank you, Columbus Museum of Art, is that access to a studio. And even though I have drawn all my life, a little bit here, a little bit there. I remember being a little girl, my father had made for us desk. I'm the middle child. I have 2 brothers. And we were lined up with our desk, our bookshelves. And one of my brothers was taking a class in architectural design. And he would sit and draw. And I wanted to do everything that my brother did. So I wanted to draw. So I'd line up my dolls and I started sketching them. And that's where it began for me. But it's not something I consistently worked at, but it's always been in me. And so having access to that space and then having the freedom to just kind of explore whatever's in my head was wonderful. I didn't want to draw. And I had brought paper with me because my idea was to work with textured papers. And it took me several months to find the right paper. And I use mulberry paper for its wonderful texture, the kind of knottiness of it, that tooth in there that, you know, sometimes when I cut strings are still pulling. And that just seems to me very much, again, like that idea of, you know, kind of struggle of finding oneself, of finding that history. Like I'm digging and now I'm cutting into it to find it. So Sit Side Me grew out of that, and just what I felt inside the paper, what I felt inside that story of what happens next. What happens the next day after Blood on a Blackberry? The young girl knows, the speaker knows that the grandmother's, you know, smart girl, just keep going to school, just keep going down that path. But something really disturbing happened to her. So how does she wrestle with that the next day? How does she confess that to her grandmother, that she was attacked? How does the grandmother explain that you have to stay on the road, that it's tough, it's not easy? And as Lucille Clifton, you know, talks about in her work as well, I mean, there's a struggle, but we get through this holding on to each other, but it ain't easy.
I felt that there was some resolve through Sit Side Me to Blood on a Blackberry, where for me, there was unresolved for that very reason that you explained, like what's next. I find it interesting in her application, Darlene, of course, included Blood on a Blackberry. And I said, well, were you aware, Darlene, that Aminah spent many, many years researching and doing art and writing about the Blackberry Patch? Were you aware of that? And how did that feel once you became aware of that, or were you aware of that?
I was not aware of the Blackberry Patch for Aminah Robinson, but it's interesting. I felt so many connections in terms of interest. And I have to say, we're both born in February, and I think she's right at the cusp, but she's an Aquarian too. So, you know, we share our stars.
Yeah.
But it was nice to find that connection and to see her just kind of building onto a landscape, if you will, because there's the Blackberry Patch, there's Poindexter Village, there's Columbus, Ohio, there is Ohio history, there is America's history. And then that tapestry that I mentioned, that's in Cincinnati, you know, she starts at a point 981 BC.
Yeah.
And then she takes you through her life, her days in Columbus.
Right.
So it's a wonderful space to build on. But no, I was not aware of that in the beginning, but it was a pleasant find. So it was a nice surprise. And also it was just a way into understanding someone as I share their space.
Right. So I might ask this because probably no one else will. And then I'll leave open some space for others to ask. So I happen to know, because I've known all of the fellows and the residents that have come before, and many of them have spoken, some publicly, about feeling a spirit in the house or being drawn to do things like sleep on the couch like Aminah did, or stay up all night like Aminah did. Do you have any leanings that you think were maybe part of Aminah's spirit driving you to do something other than to work in the studio, which is a huge one?
Oh, that was a gift. That was a gift. But in terms of spirit and leanings, it's funny because as people came into the studio, I would get questions like, do you see anything? Do you hear anything? And I'll share this, and you may have another side of this. But when I went to Cincinnati, when I came back, so I had these huge panels, and you'll see them inside. They're I think 47 inches wide and 8 feet long. And so they stretch out on this table. And as I'm thinking, I'll use cuts of, what do you call those things? Post-it notes, and just kind of map out where I'm going with a visual. And I left some things there. I came back and there were buttons on the tabletop and a paintbrush. And it was a clean paintbrush, a little skinny brush that was not there before. And it was sitting on top of my paper. So I'm sure nobody would come into a studio and put a paintbrush on an artist's paper that they're working on. So I have always accepted that paintbrush. as a gift from Aminah and the suggestion of put a little paint on it. But I was nervous. I didn't lean into that. I have to thank Roger Brackens because he came by one day and we were enjoying just kind of with the mulberry paper, how it looks, the texture makes it look old. And we had this idea of, and he showed me on his phone, you know, how to burn paper to age it. So we went outside and we were burning the edges of paper, and then we tore off a piece and we were soaking it in tea, trying to get that aged look inside the paper. So it didn't quite work for me, but so I probably should have listened to Aminah, and just taken the brush and dipped it in and painted. So, you know, put a little paint in there. So maybe that's something I'll lean into in the future.
Next time, right? When you open your own studio in your house.
Yeah, I think there's a couch coming out.
Yeah. And then I'm just going to ask one more and then open it up. You are a writer. You're a visual artist. Are you claiming that now?
I most certainly am.
And I really invite you all to go into the gallery to see her amazing work that she produced all while living in the house for the last 3 months.
So I'm sleepy.
She's got to be sleepy. So maybe you have
My
adopted.
fingers are tired from the stitches.
Maybe you have adopted some of Aminah's sleeping habits, or not sleeping habits.
Yeah, I was up at 5, and I think she was up around 4:35 every morning. Yeah, that's my creative
Right.
time
You were
as well.
always up when I called you.
Yeah. You're like, can I cut? I'm like, oh, sure, I'm up.
So I'm going to share something that you all also don't know. And if you don't mind, our artist, the path was not a straight one while she's been here. She's been amazing and a trooper, but she had a car accident like 1 month in where she suffered. Do you mind?
Sure, go ahead.
She suffered a concussion and she stayed and she hung in there and she worked through it. And one of the most beautiful things, though, I mean, this is a very positive person you have right here. And she told me a story about the community of Shepherd, and I would love for you to share that story with our audience, because I think it's important to know how you were nurtured through.
Oh, yeah. The folks in Shepherd, the folks in Columbus, the friends of my friends have been there for me. They've been a family, and the family of this museum, bringing me food, taking me to get my groceries, taking me to get my prescriptions, taking me to the hospital when I needed to get there. But the thing that I'll say that came out of the experience of the concussion was when it immediately happened, what I was told is, you know, no lights, no computer, put the books down. And I can't read, you know, what am I going to do? But I'm very mindful. My mind's very active. And maybe Aminah was whispering to me, but I used that time of quiet and I started just cutting with an X-Acto knife into these blackberry sheets and started just laying out. So I think it was also a time for me that became very creative because I got to use another part of my creative self, another part of my imagination. And, you know, the tools were there, you know, how to shape a figure, how to shape a building, how to create a road, and just that sensibility of, you know, colors bumping up next to each other. There were things that I had to figure out. And Wendy Kendrick, a local artist here, was great. Answering my texts, my phone calls, and coming with me to the studio. Like, how can I do this? How can I make this paper more stable? You know, because sometimes I bumped around and I would tear my paper, and it's like, well, how do I fix this? So, you know, I'm very grateful to all of those who came in to rescue me on that as well. Yes, thank you.
Yes, and you said a friend of yours gave you some wisdom also.
Well, I have to say, Shauna Morgan, I think it was morning texts and late night texts, and just helping me think through the prose and the poetry and helping the story become what it wants to be. So again, thank you for that. Thank you.
I would like to open this up for anyone that has a question for Darlene. There are mics right at the end of each aisle. If you have a question, feel free to walk toward the mic and ask a question. And I think you're open to just about any question, right?
Sure. And I'll tell you, the other thing I'm open to do too is it was great before we came together here. I was in the gallery and just chatting with my family about the works. And it was a wonderful conversation with my family, my friends, and people I didn't know who were just curious about the work. So I definitely appreciate it. I'd be glad to answer from there too.
Okay, let's
So
start.
I
on this
can't
side.
really see you so well, but I
Start
I
here.
see people. Yes.
Hi, thank
Hi.
you. My name's Taisha. Really excited to see the work that you've produced. Thank you for persevering, even after what you've experienced. I think that means a lot to other folks who are storytellers. It gives us a certain type of permission. So thank you for that. I do have a question, and I'm sorry if you kind of addressed it at the beginning. It's a question about historical research and that process. So as you're searching for the story of Fanny, is there ever a time where like the oral tradition or what you have heard about Fanny is different from the historical record or the written record? And is there a way that you reconcile that as you're building the story?
Well, thank you for that. And the thing about Fanny is I didn't know anything about her. I discovered her as I was following my mother's tree, and I kept going back. Because when you look at the records, they'll tell you if it's listed and if the information was provided to the census taker, it'll list the name of a parent. And it'll list the name of siblings and other people who were living in the home. So Fanny was someone who was a surprise for me, but the thing about Fanny was I couldn't go back further. And that's where like she really intrigues me. And, you know, after seeing her name and just kind of sitting inside that room with just kind of those blank spaces, I sat outside by the river and I looked over, there's this beautiful garden. And I saw this sign chiseled that said memory garden. And I was like, yeah, that's what I want. I want a memory. I want a memory of Fanny. And I don't have any way to find it, but here's the beauty. This is where the things that I feel, the way she made me feel, I can imagine. You're not going to be able to find it all, and it's okay, but we know that they're there. This land is not silent. Our people were not silent. Our handiwork is all across the place. So it's there. What kind of work are you doing? You sound like you're researching.
I am, and I actually very recently have been redirected toward Appalachia. That's where my people are from. And have learned about violent history and how we ended up in Ohio. And so I'm actually in the process of retelling that story. But we have oral tradition, right? That doesn't necessarily match the newspapers, the written record. And so I'm trying to figure out how to reconcile what's true, what's not true, what feels right. Is it all the same? And so your process is helping in that.
So what's interesting what you say there also is, one thing I said in the beginning, and I think my brother can attest to this, we could, we lived in the same house all our lives, but I'm sure there are events that happen that we remember them differently. So therefore, what's your truth?
Right.
What's her truth? What did she say? And she can't just speak to you and tell you, or maybe there are ways that you can reach in to find. Barbara Chase Rabu writes historical fiction, and she wrote a book called Sally Hemings. And there was a moment in that book that I felt that was the most telling for me about what a writer does to just dive in and kind of get you to the character in a way that you can understand them. And that is something very plausible. So we know that Sally Hemings went to Paris with Thomas Jefferson and his daughters. We know that she came back, and not long after that, she had a baby. And so in the book, there's this moment when Sally Hemings comes back and she kind of avoids her mother. She's pregnant. you know, and her mother's there on the plantation. She's looking, you know, she got thoughts. Sally got thoughts. Everybody's got thoughts, probably some conversation too. And then there's this moment where Sally and her mother come together. And her mother's asking her, why did you come back here? You got out. Do we know if that conversation really happened? No, we can't know that. But what we know about mothers and daughters and the sacrifices parents make for their children, we can imagine that conversation was had.
Yeah.
So it's plausible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
So write inside of what you feel.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi, Miss Darlene. It's Christopher.
Hey,
I had no idea
how are
you were
ya?
from Virginia. I'm from Richmond. Like my
You're from
family went 6 months
Richmond.
down
All
in
right.
Baptist Church.
We got to talk.
I know. And my question is kind of related to that. I've been living in Columbus now for like 6 years, and growing up at 6 miles down, you know, it's like one of the oldest churches, and it started out in Brown Island. And Columbus reminds me so much of Richmond. And actually going to Aminah's exhibition and being in her home, it reminded me so much of home in Richmond. So I wanted to ask you, being in Columbus, and then being around Aminah and her being able to actually capture Bronzeville, because Jackson Ward is just, you know, gone. That's where my family's from. Did you find any type of like intersections, or did it make you want to like even deep, go deeper into, you know, the history of being from Virginia?
So, well, thank you for that. Thank you. So I was born in Richmond, and I've run into people who are my age, older, who will ask me, what hospital were you born in? And that's always an interesting question when you're asked that, because what people are trying to figure out is before things were desegregated.
Especially in
So I was born in the Black hospital. So, but we came to Washington when I was very little. So my memories of Virginia come to me through those visits, come to me through holidays and summers. And that's what makes the beauty of my mother's speech and my mother's storytelling so important to me. Now, in terms of Aminah Robinson and kind of that holding up, if you will, that place, that history, I think the connection I feel there is, when I think about some of those landscapes and I think about the development that's going on today, I recognize that there were things that those communities that my people lived in, there were things that municipalities, the state governments provide that they neglected those people on. So with that, I feel the neglect of Black communities. I feel the neglect of poor people, Black people, marginalized people. And in that regard, I stand with Aminah in holding up those stories so that they're not forgotten. You know, and that's one of the big, you know, as a friend of mine says, that's the big lie. And that is that we don't have an interior life, that it didn't really matter to us. It didn't matter to them. Like while they lived in this place, there was someone living in a house that probably felt like a palace. And they could walk by that, ride by that, and live with that. And that was wrong.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Donna Marbury. First, I want to
Oh,
say
hi.
thank you for sharing your process with us. So I'm a writer and I really love creative process. Can you talk about space, the importance of having space, like to paraphrase Virginia Woolf, every woman needs a room with a view, which is the experience that you are just culminating. So talk about like, what was your creative space before, and will you have this kind of space after?
So I have to say in that regard, I'm a bit blessed. I have a lovely space from which to write. But I think the space, but we may need different spaces and places that we sit in to do our writing. The key thing is, and this is the thing that I learned, and when I was getting my MFA that a professor shared with me, it's all about your butt in a seat and writing. It is, you know, things will just come to you, this wonderful inspiration. You have to sit down every day and work at it. So wherever that chair is, You know, I finished a manuscript that, you know, much of my time was spent in coffee shops because I just like people around. I didn't want to be alone, but I did want to be inside my own head. And so I went to coffee shops. I went to, you know, sometimes I just went upstairs or I might sit in the park. Sometimes I just sat in the car, you know, wherever I wanted to be for a moment, because sometimes I'm listening for something. Maybe I want to hear or think about characters sitting in a space and hearing the rain. So I'll go sit in a space and listen to the rain. I'll listen to it for hours and just kind of, you know, feel myself in that space. What does it smell like outside? What does it feel like on my skin? You know, what is it doing to the air? What is it doing to the sky? So I believe that you can find that space. And you have to privilege that time so that you can do it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to add a little bit to that space and place in
Mhm.
Amina's house. When Darlene entered the house, and every artist that comes into the house is different, they claim whatever space feels right for them. And whatever part of the house, because Aminah worked all over the house. So whatever part she wanted to claim would be fine. So Darlene comes in and she's like, well, I'm gonna use this room, which was a upstairs,
Sitting room.
the sitting room, which no one had ever claimed that space before. I'm like, great, use
Yeah,
it.
wonderful light in there.
It was
It's great.
light, and she says, may I put my books on the floor? I'm like, you can put your books anywhere. Just claim the house, use the space. And so she claimed this lovely room. It was shortly thereafter, you're like now all over the house. So she started in a nice little room that was perfect for a writer and a reader. But then the last week, she says, you know what? I really like this bed. I really like this bed to put my art on because it feels like a quilt. I said, okay, all right. You have really moved around the house.
Yeah, I
So,
did definitely moved around the house. And also, as I was, you know, started working more on my panels or banners, and again, they're like, you know, 47 inches wide and 8 feet long. So they're pretty big. And, you know, to get to reach over them and to work around and do the stitch work, or if I'm cutting inside the work, I needed to move things. But so there are those who will call me a shorty. And there's debate how short that is. But Aminah surely was a foot taller than I am.
Yeah.
And so the tables that she worked at, I just really couldn't reach things well.
right.
So I needed a special table.
Yes.
But I got one that was that you can adjust. So if
Right.
there's someone who comes in again who's 6 feet tall, they will be able to work in that space very well.
That's right. But I keep learning from every artist that comes in how to utilize the space. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, and thank you for sharing your work today. One thing that I really love and value about Aminah Robinson was that she was thankfully not entirely discerning about how she pursued and put herself towards. Me too. Something I real.
It's that rib fest calling to you.
You know, so I guess to get to the heart of it so that we can all go eat. I'm curious to hear, and Taisha asked a great question about research, and I want to hone in on that a little bit more and ask how you accumulate and carry the stories that you pursue. Because one, I'm curious, like emotionally, how you pursue and carry those stories. It's a lot of weight. And two, kind of how you lay all those out and decide, because when we're dealing with undertold or untold histories, I know that my impulse as a writer is to shout everything, but that does not necessarily make for the best body of work. So how discerning are you when it comes to accumulating and then piecing out what you find?
Okay. So when it comes to accumulation, and my son is here. And so he knows I keep a lot of stuff around. So I keep everything. And letting go is really tough. But one thing that I do, and let me point out, so I love notebooks. And so this notebook, I have several of them. And so when I see them, this means Columbus. So for everything that I do, I try to at least compartmentalize all the junk that I have. by color. And in some ways, even though it doesn't look like it, it's organized in a way that I know what it is. Now, if someone had to come behind me and find something, that wouldn't happen, but I know it's there. So I try to organize, I use notebooks a lot, and I organize my work inside those notebooks. I keep a lot of folders, and I keep clippings, I keep things that remind me of stuff. And, you know, again, to my family, it just looks like, why are you keeping all that junk? But for me, these are my ways sometimes to access story or to remember something about, maybe there's something that maybe a character enjoyed. And so I hold it with me. So I'm not sure if, I think the thing is you'll find your path, you'll find your way. And when it comes to kind of working through and finishing things, as you know, it's hard. Deadlines are good because at least they'll, you know, push you to a point. But then sometimes you're not even ready for that deadline, and you have to decide when the work is ready or when it's not.
Thank you.
I wish I could offer you more, but
No, that's great. Thank you so much.
okay. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, there's someone
Hi.
over here.
Yeah.
Hi.
I'm Jocelyn Hamlar, my sister.
Hi.
Hi,
sister.
good to meet you. I've enjoyed this a lot.
Thank you.
I think each residency that you do has got to be very different, and you come away with something. And something, and in this instance, you're in someone's home. And it seems to me that as you spend that time in the home, you're hearing her thoughts, you're looking at how she, you know, did her creative process. Is there anything she taught you while you were there that you'll say, okay, I got this one thing from this specific place, and something that will carry over into your work in a way that we may notice if we know Aminah, or it could just be yours to have in your own heart?
Sure. Thank you for that. And I think for me, that is really thinking of myself as a multidisciplinary artist. And words are important to me, but also visual is important to me. And how do I bring those together inside my work? And even today, like, you know, the idea of starting this talk out with music to bring Aminah into the room. I mean, I wanted you to see something. I wanted you to hear something. I want you to feel something, because I'm talking about stories that are inside of us.
I'm sure we all did today. This has been great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, I see a special question coming up.
Hello, I'm Marcus Taylor. I am the son of Darlene Taylor. I've had plenty of my high school papers proofread and proofwritten and editorialized by Darlene Taylor over here. If you could, just for everybody here, and including your two granddaughters, Dave and Zoe, could you make Fanny come alive in this picture right here and kind of explain the picture a little bit more?
Sure. Okay. And thank you for that, because actually Fanny does not sit inside this picture. So this picture, the baby, and, you know, the family, we've kind of gone back and forth on this because this photograph is over 100 years old, but the baby was Aunt Mary. Aunt Mary died, it was like 2004, and she was 102 when she died. So, and she, in that picture, maybe she's a year old. The woman who's holding her, and I'm sorry, and Aunt Mary is my grandmother's sister. And that's my father's mother's aunt. That is her mother standing, holding her. And the name that I know her as is Mom Sarah. I don't know very much about her. The woman who's seated, I don't know. And I want to know her. But at least I have a picture of her. Fanny is someone I found through research, and she is a grandmother. I don't know anything about her, and I want to know. So, and the sad thing is, some of the people who may know a little something are no longer here. Sadly, also, the records are skimpy because there are things that people didn't want to talk about. And that's why you see those blank spaces, even in the census report. So this is one set of grandmothers on my paternal side, and Fanny is a grandmother from my maternal side. So as I continue to write and research, I'll learn more, I'll write more, and I'll share more. And you all will know. You'll be the first to know. Now you're gonna be my readers.
Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you all for being here. It means everything.
Thank you, Darlene R. Taylor. I know this is not the last that we will see of you in Columbus. You are welcome back anytime. And with that, I would really like to invite you all to continue enjoying more of this talk, but in the gallery, because Darlene has offered to speak to you about the wonderful show that is in the Walter Wing to the right as you enter the glass doors to the right. She has a beautiful show called Blood on a Blackberry of her work that she created while she was here. Also in our shop, Darlene has presented for the first time, I think, a broadside Sit Side Me, which is absolutely beautiful. So go into the shop and take something home with you as an original piece of her. All right. I also want to thank everyone here that has contributed to having Darlene as a resident at the house. There's so many people behind the scenes that keep the house going. There are people like Darlene said in the curatorial department that do everything from hang the work to put the words on the walls. And Greg Jones was also someone that helped with that. Dave Leach keeps the house going. Thankfully, he does that. We have Mark Zuzik, who's here recording this for posterity. This is a recording, so if you want to share this with anyone in the future, we will have a recording that we will share with you, Darlene, that you can share out. And also, of course, Jacob is behind the glass, making sure all of this happens. I want to thank my son Atticus for helping Darlene get around town when she couldn't drive.
Thank you very
and of
much
course,
for that.
Rich, who is Darlene's partner, who has been phenomenal. I mean,
we all gotta
I
give Rich an applause.
I think he also has his own experience of this residency. That'll be next week's talk. How about that? But anyway, thank you all. Please come to the galleries and let's continue this conversation. If you ever need anything from me, I'm here at the museum pretty much all the time. Again, I'm Deidre Hamlar, and thank you for being here.